A hush settled over the vast auditorium as the doors at the back of the AGT stage slowly opened, and from that darkness, a small figure stepped into the blinding light. Her shoulders slightly hunched, her fingers nervously gripping the sides of her jacket. And although thousands of people murmured with excitement, she looked as if she were carrying a secret, heavier than her size. A secret that might change every heartbeat in that room. And as she walked toward the microphone, every camera shifted, every judge leaned forward. And every member of the audience felt something unexplainable, rising inside them, a strange mix of curiosity and anticipation that was about to explode into one of the most unforgettable moments in AGT history. One of those rare events that people would talk about for years, replaying them over and over, wondering how they were lucky enough to witness it live. The girl paused at the center of the stage, taking a breath so deep it lifted her entire chest, and for a moment, it looked like she was gathering courage from someone unseen, someone long gone, someone whose legacy shook the world. And although no one knew her name yet, everyone understood there was something different about her, something in the way she breathed, the way she trembled, the way she blinked rapidly, as if holding back a storm of emotions. And even Simon Cowell raised one eyebrow, slowly sensing that this was not just another audition, not just another hopeful performer, but the beginning of something monumental, something that would echo beyond that night. When Howie gently asked her for her name, she swallowed hard, her voice quivering as she said, "My name is Amira," and the room gave her a soft, encouraging cheer. But what she said next made the entire world freeze at once, because after another shaky breath, she whispered into the microphone, "I am Michael Jackson's daughter." And for a full second, maybe two, silence crushed the room so hard it felt like air had been sucked out of every lung. In the building, every judge stared wide-eyed. The audience gasped collectively, and cameras zoomed in, as if they couldn't quite believe what they heard, as if their ears had deceived them. But Amira didn't flinch instead. She lowered her head slightly, waiting for the wave of disbelief to settle, knowing this was a truth people were not prepared for. Murmurs rippled through the audience in waves. Some people touched their chests. Some covered their mouths, others leaned forward trying to see her more clearly, searching her face for the familiar echoes of the king of pop, the soft cheekbones, the almond-shaped eyes, the subtle grace in her posture that seemed inherited, not taught. And Simon leaned back, folding his arms slowly, his expression shifting from shock to cautious wonder, because if what she said was true, this was not just an audition, this was history unfolding, a moment so powerful it might break the internet. And Amira knew it. She felt the weight of her father's legacy pressing against her ribs, urging her to breathe, to trust her own voice, to step into the light that had waited for her for so many years. But before she sang, she spoke quietly, her voice trembling like a fragile ribbon caught in a breeze. "I never knew if I should share who I am, but I've carried his music in my heart my whole life. And tonight I want to honor him, not with imitation, but with my own voice. Because he always told me, even when I was little, your gift is yours." And hearing that, some people in the audience began wiping tears already, because they knew Michael Jackson had always encouraged courage, individuality, and soul. And here stood his daughter, trembling, but ready to step into the light with her truth exposed. The judges exchanged glances, as if silently agreeing that something extraordinary was about to happen. And Amira nodded at the sound technician, signaling that she was ready, her small hand tightening around the microphone, just enough to stop it from slipping. And the lights dimmed, the air thickened, and for one heartbeat, the entire arena waited for her first note, knowing deep down that the next sound that left her lips could shatter the world, the internet, the expectations, the legacy, everything. And then she sang a soft note, at first so delicate that it almost floated away. But within a second, it blossomed into something breathtaking. Something powerful yet gentle, as if two worlds collided in her voice. The echo of her father's soul and the unique tone of her own rising spirit. And the audience sat motionless, completely speechless, because her voice didn't sound like an imitation or a tribute. It sounded like a rebirth, a continuation of a legacy through an identity entirely her own. And Simon's usual cold, analytical stare softened instantly, his lips parting slightly, as if he couldn't even breathe. Her voice soared higher, weaving through the air like warm silk, bending gracefully around every emotion she carried. Inside the joy, the grief, the weight of expectation. the longing to prove herself, and the need to honor her father without losing herself in his shadow. And as she reached the first chorus, a gentle tremor traveled through her voice that felt so authentic, so raw, that it left the audience shivering, because she wasn't just singing a song. She was telling her story, the story of a girl who grew up in silence, in hiding in the shadows of a man loved by millions. And tonight, she was stepping out for the very first time. The moment she placed her hand on her heart, while singing, a wave of emotion swept through the crowd. People began sobbing softly, holding on to each other, clutching tissues, squeezing hands, and even the judges seemed overcome with emotion, especially Sophia, who covered her mouth, shaking her head slowly, as if she could not believe the beauty she was witnessing. And Amira continued singing, pouring every suppressed feeling into every note, rising higher with confidence that grew like fire in her chest, each second melting away the years of fear she had carried. By the time she reached the bridge, her voice had transformed completely, no longer trembling, no longer fragile, but glowing with the strength of someone who had finally found her place, her identity. Her courage and the spotlight illuminated her face in a way that made her look almost celestial, as if her father's spirit were wrapped around her shoulders, guiding her gently as she sang. And in that moment, the audience didn't see a young, nervous girl, they saw a star, a force, a story destined to be told. And the cameras captured every trembling tear falling from her cheeks. Then came her final note, long soaring. Impossible for someone so young, a note that carried pain, hope, memory, and destiny all at once. A note that brought the entire auditorium to its knees, emotionally, because it held something indescribable, something that felt like closure, love and resurrection intertwined. And the very second she released it, the arena erupted in a thunderstorm of applause, cheers, screams, and gasps. People standing on their feet, instantly clapping wildly, as if trying to send their energy straight into her heart. Amira lowered her head, tears pouring freely now, her hands shaking as she tried to catch her breath, and every judge stood with the audience, giving her one of the longest standing ovations in AGT history. And when she finally lifted her eyes, she saw Simon Cowell, a man not easily moved, sitting down slowly, his face turned downward, wiping his eyes with his thumb, visibly trying to hide the tears rolling down his cheeks. Because even he, the toughest judge, could not handle the magnitude of what he had just heard. When he finally looked up, his eyes were glossy, his voice cracking slightly as he said, "Your father would be incredibly proud." And before he even finished, the audience erupted again, cheering his words, feeling the truth in them, because this wasn't scripted, this wasn't staged, this was raw. Real emotional truth, pouring from a man who had heard thousands of voices in his lifetime, but had never heard anything quite like this, anything quite so sacred. Simon stood resting one hand on the judge's table, as if trying to steady himself, breathing deeply, and Amira watched him, tears still streaming, but a small smile beginning to form on her lips. The kind of smile that only appears when someone's deepest fears finally dissolve into purpose. And Simon nodded at her slowly, not speaking for a moment, letting the weight of the moment breathe itself out naturally, letting her feel the full impact of her courage and talent. Then with a slow, deliberate movement, Simon reached toward the golden buzzer, placing his finger on it gently, almost reverently, as the crowd began screaming uncontrollably, and Amira gasped, her hands flying to her face, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe what was about to happen. And Simon pressed it with a firm, emotional push, sending a storm of golden confetti into the air, swirling around her like a blessing, like a golden rain crafted just for her story, for her journey. Amira fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, as the golden confetti covered her, sparkling in the spotlight, looking almost magical, almost unreal. And her voice cracked as she whispered, "Thank you," over and over again, not just to the judges, not just to the audience, but to the universe, to her father, to herself, to the journey that had brought her here. And the cheering grew louder, filling the arena with so much warmth. It felt like the walls themselves were vibrating with emotion. Backstage host Terry Crews wiped away his own tears, while watching her collapse into a hug with the judges, her body trembling with relief, pride, and overwhelming love. And the crew members behind the cameras were crying too, some quietly, some openly, because they all knew they had witnessed a cultural moment, A historic audition, a performance that would be replayed millions of times across the world, inspiring young artists, touching grieving hearts, reminding people that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it trembles, sometimes it cries. Sometimes it steps onto a stage with shaking hands and a truth too heavy to carry alone. As she walked off stage, still covered in golden confetti, she paused and looked up into the light, whispering something only she could hear. A message for her father. A message for the man who shaped the world with his music. And she smiled through tears, knowing that tonight she honored him, not by copying him, not by standing in his shadow, but by shining her own light, her own story, her own voice, because that is what he would have wanted, that is what he would have celebrated. And with that, the world changed. The legacy continued and a new star was born. Not because of her name, but because of her heart, her truth, and her courage to finally step forward and say, "This is me." And for the first time in her life, millions of people listened, millions of people felt her, millions of people embraced her. And as the cameras faded out, the world waited eagerly, breathlessly, to see what this extraordinary girl would do next.